Okay, my name is Lauren Kerrison and I work for the TCCI as a work health and safety business advisor. We try and run a couple sessions a month that are free for people to join just to get a bit of information on something topical at that time. And today's topic is around how to manage hazardous manual tasks. Now, I'm sure you both appreciate this is quite a large topic and you can only cover so much in half an hour to an hour of content. So I do have quite a few resources towards the end if you do want some further support and you're not quite getting what you needed from the webinar, where you can go through those and we can assist you a bit further. So as usual, our webinar is just to kind of give you a high level overview of a topic. So today's on hazardous manual tasks. A lot of the information is from the Code of Practice from October 2018, but there is a little bit information from other resources as well. And in general, just be covering what a hazardous manual task is, musculoskeletal disorders, who has a duty of care, and how we can minimise the risk, which is the biggest part of the content, I suppose, is how you can actually go about doing it. So any of my large group of attendees would like to answer this question. What is a hazardous manual task, or what do you think it would be defined as?
Oh, any task that is manual and presents a risk of injury.
Yep, pretty spot on there. So the definition from Safe Work Australia. So the manual task, just like you said, involves using your body to lift, lower, push, pull, carry, or otherwise move, hold, or restrain any person, animal, or thing. Examples of manual handling tasks include stacking shelves, working on conveyor lines, entering data into a computer. A manual task becomes hazardous when one or more of the following risk factors are present. So that's just a manual task, whereas if we want to call it a hazardous manual task, it would need to be repetitive or sustained force, high or sudden force, a repetitive movement, sustained or awkward posture, or exposure to vibration. You'll get a copy of all these slides. You can get a copy of the recording as well, but we'll go through each of those dot points as well. So the biggest thing or outcome from hazardous manual tasks are musculoskeletal disorders, or MSD, they can be referred to. And basically, this is what we want to avoid as business owners, managers, health and safety professionals, workers, everybody. This is what we want to avoid. We don't want to be getting musculoskeletal disorders or injuries in the workplace at all. So a MSD refers to an injury or disease to the musculoskeletal system. So some examples can be sprains or strains to muscles, ligaments, or tendons. They're your more common ones. We can get back injuries, including damage to muscles, can be tendons, ligaments, spinal discs, nerves, joints, bones, lots of things. Your joints, bones, or degeneration of those bones, including injuries to shoulders, elbows, wrists, hips, knees, ankles, hands, feet. It can also be nerve-related injuries or compression. You can also have muscular, vascular disorders, soft tissue injuries, including hernias or chronic pain. So the list there is quite big. Usually occurs in two ways, or a combination of these two ways. So a gradual wear and tear to joints, ligaments, muscles, or intervertebral discs caused by repetitive or repeated or continuous use of the same body parts. Or it can be sudden damage caused by strenuous activity or unexpected movement, such as when loads being handled, move, or change position suddenly. So as mentioned, it can be one or a combination of both of these, but it does not include crushing, entrapment, or cutting results from mechanical operation of plant. So it's got to have that gradual wear and tear or sudden damage caused by like a strenuous activity to be considered a musculoskeletal disorder. But again, from all those examples I reeled off, there are a lot of musculoskeletal disorders that you could potentially have in your workplace. And this is what we would like to avoid. Who within the business has a duty of care in relation to managing hazardous manual tasks or putting controls in place, I suppose. So your ultimate duty of care is your PCBU, which is a person conducting a business or undertaking. So that's your the business itself or the director of that business. The designers, manufacturers, importers, suppliers of manufacturing equipment, plant, machines, tools, they all also have a duty of care to ensure that the equipment that they're supplying or importing or manufacturing doesn't possess a foreseeable hazardous manual task hazard, but if it does, that they've got some control measures in place. Officers have a duty of care, so they've got to make sure that these tasks or plant or equipment, whatever it is that's hazardous that comes in, is risk assessed, and before they purchase this equipment as well, that they're looking at those hazards and making sure that they can put effective control measures in place prior to the equipment, tool, or whatever actually ending up in your facilities. And worker or other, so workers still have an obligation to take reasonable care of their own health and safety. So while they probably don't have control as far as what the business is buying or bringing in, they do have control over following the relevant policies and procedures and training that they are provided and making sure that they are taking reasonable care of their own health and safety. So quite a few duty holders in relation to hazardous manual tasks, and it's the same for most hazards in the workplace. So what is involved in managing the risk of musculoskeletal disorders? So we break it down basically, the work health and safety regs as a duty holder is asking us to perform a risk assessment basically. So they want us to identify reasonably foreseeable hazards that could give rise to risk. They want us to eliminate the risk where reasonably practicable, and where it's not reasonably practicable, that we minimise the risk using the hierarchy of controls. We then need to maintain and implement control measures that are effective. And further to that, we need to review our control measures and make sure that they are still effective. So if that didn't make a whole lot of sense to you, that's fine, because it is a bit wordy. We will be breaking down each step in the slides as well. Are there any questions yet from either of you? Are you happy to power?
Thanks.
Okay, cool. Keep going. So how to manage the risk. If you've ever seen this disc before, it's straight out of the code of practice for how to manage health and safety risks in the workplace. Breaks it down from steps 1 till 4. So the first step being identifying the hazards. You then need to, step 2, assess the risk through a risk assessment matrix to see where it is a high, medium, low risk. 3 is to implement some control measures to reduce the risk score. And then 4 would be to review, because if you've ever been involved in risk assessments before, we might put this really nice control measure in place, and then when we review it, we actually realise either the team members aren't actually using it or it's not as effective as we thought that it would be. So it's really important to have that review process in place when managing risk. Now you'll see around the side it says consultation. Consultation is so important when it comes to managing risk. I've already kind of just said an example. We may implement a control measure as a manager, and if we haven't told the whole team about this control measure, then it's not going to be working, is it? Because they're not doing it. People are also more likely to comply with policies and procedures, I suppose, if they're involved in the implementation of them. So if you had them involved in the risk assessment and involved in the process of coming up with this control measure, you should get a little bit more buy-in from the team members as well. So we basically need to perform a risk assessment. Identifying hazardous manual tasks. So the first step in risk management process is to identify all hazardous manual tasks. This involves finding all relevant things or situations that may contribute to musculoskeletal disorders. Hazards generally arise from the following aspects of work. These are work tasks and how they are performed, work design and management, the tools, equipment and objects handled, or your physical work environment. Hazards may be identified by looking at the workplace and how work is carried out. So just doing some observations, and then also further to that, consult with your workers. So your workers are the ones working around these hazards every day. They're working using this equipment, using the tools, using the plant. They should have a fair understanding of some hazards associated with the work that they are doing. And when you are doing a risk assessment, they may come up with hazards that you weren't aware that were present as well. So consulting with workers is so important. Review available information, look for trends. If you're getting a bit of a trend of some shoulder injuries in the workplace, have a look at those, do some investigations, break it down. Where are these injuries occurring? Why are they occurring? At what hours into their work schedule are they occurring? Really important. It is reactive data. It's after someone's been injured, but it's so important to be reviewing that data and seeing what it is that your business hazardous manual tasks potentially are, and observe manual tasks. So kind of the backflip of what I said about workers, they can also be complacent with hazards. So if you stand there and observe them, you don't need to stand there and watch them like a hawk, but if you observe the manual tasks that they are performing, you can see the way they're moving, you can see the way they're bending, and you might be able to pick up hazards that they aren't aware of as well. So these 4 things are some pretty key ways that you can identify these hazardous manual tasks in the workplace. Now, there's a lot of different characteristics of what a hazardous manual task can be. One of the biggest ones, or causal factors, characteristics, are forces. So we've got quite a few little cartoon examples here, but you've got a few different type of forces that you can be dealing with at work. One of the main ones are repetitive forces. So examples could be lifting and stacking goods on and off a pallet. You could be repetitively pressing components with your thumbs, or you could be flipping things on a conveyor to check them. That's all considered a repetitive force. You'll then also hear something called a sustained force. So this occurs when force is applied continuously over a period of time. So this could be pushing or pulling a trolley around, an area, holding down a trigger to operate a power tool. They're all sustained forces. Then you've got high forces. So they occur when increased muscle effort is required in response to a task. So these can be things like lifting, lowering, carrying heavy objects, or pushing or pulling an object that is hard to move and stop. So a bit of high force is required for that task. And then finally, there's sudden force as well. So jerking or unexpected movement while handling an item or load. These can be impact recoil of a large nail gun, throwing or catching objects, kind of a forceful, sudden force that somebody could be dealing with. And these are the main, it's usually within forces where we're seeing those musculoskeletal disorders. You've also got movement and the way that we move. So repetitive movement, so to be using the same parts of the body to repeat a similar movement over a period of time. Examples of repetitive movements include painting, lifting goods from a conveyor belt and packing them into a carton, typing on keyboards, that's a big one, there's the photo there of that. Repeatedly reaching for or assembling components, or using sockets or ratchets or spanners to unscrew long bolts. You get the drift of what a repetitive movement can be. So you've got repetitive forces, and then you've got repetitive movements as well. We've also got posture. Posture's a really big one, especially moving into the more, what we're seeing now is a more computerized, automated lifestyle in a lot of ways, not every industry, but posture is a really, really big one. So an ideal posture is one where on that far left-hand side, which not many people stand like this at work, you're in a neutral position, you're straight, you're upright, your feet are a good length apart from each other. This is how on the far left-hand side is ideal for our bodies to be, but that's not how most people are working. So we can have a sustained posture that can be hazardous. So this can be where parts of or your whole body is kept in the same position for a prolonged period of time. You can see with this photo on the right, they've got both their hands up above their head, so that is a sustained posture. You've also got awkward postures, so where any part of your body is in an uncomfortable or unnatural position. This can be if you're unbalanced. It can also be if your posture requires extreme joint angles or bending or twisting. You get the drift with different postures that you could be dealing with in the workplace. You've also got vibration. So you can have either whole body vibration, which occurs when vibration is transmitted through your whole body. So riding a tractor on the left-hand side is an example of whole body vibration. And then you can have hand-arm vibration, which is more like the other two photos. So using a hand drill, chainsaw, some kind of hand tool that can emit a vibration through your hand, wrist, arm area. And these can be hazardous because they can give you musculoskeletal disorders. So this is why we avoid those three. So it's just good to be aware of them. We then need to assess the risk. So once we have identified our hazardous manual tasks, we then need to identify who will be participating in the risk assessment. Again, you need a good representation. You need workers, managers, supervisors. If you've got health and safety committee, great, get them involved. If you don't, all good. Ensure the risk assessment is at a time where the task can be examined. So there's no use going over to a machine that's not operating that day, that you can't actually watch people move or conduct the work how they usually would. And also we'll be writing this in a formal risk assessment, like on a piece of paper as well. Have both of you performed risk assessments or got an understanding of what a risk assessment is?
Yeah, sure. My role's work health and safety anyway.
So. Oh, so you're over it. Yep. About yourself, Heath. See if he's got a microphone. Doesn't look like it. That's okay. So you would understand that you would need to have it on paper to do your risk assessment. Questions to ask during the risk assessment. So these are the three that constantly come up in the codes of practice. Does the task involve repetitive movements? Does the task involve sustained or awkward postures? Does the task involve repetitive or sustained forces? And again, we just explained those in the last 3 slides of examples of what those could be. Now, as a general rule, repetitive means a movement or force if performed more than twice a minute. So it's actually not a lot at all to be considered a repetitive task. The risk rises the more bending and twisting that you're doing. And also, as a general rule, long duration means the task is done for more than a total of 2 hours over the whole shift, or continuously for more than 30 minutes at a time. So it would be fair to say that it's pretty easy for something to be called a repetitive task. Now, postures and movements, here's just some visuals or examples when doing your risk assessment. So look for bending the back or head forwards or sidewards more than 20 degrees. You've got these pictures here that can show you. Again, if you've got this happening repetitively or in a sustained position, it can then be hazardous. You've also got bending the back or head backwards for more than 5 degrees by basically looking upright. Twisting the back or neck more than 20 degrees. So you've got 2 examples here. The top ones where they're kind of twisting more their torso, whereas the second one's their head. Working with one or both hands above shoulder height. So that's more of a sustained posture. Reaching forward or sidewards more than 30 centimetres from the body. So you can see the bakery example up here. There are a lot of workplaces where you're reaching or extending your body out with a load, even as simple as working on a desk and having to reach 30 centimetres with your body. Reaching behind the body by pulling, lifting, carrying anything. Standing with most of the body's weight on one leg. So you're not distributing your weight in a good position or posture for your body if we're doing that. Twisting, turning, grabbing, picking or wringing actions with the fingers, hands or arms that include excessive bending of the wrist. Example here is somebody holding a plate. You've also got working with fingers close together or wide apart. These seem like really, really small movements, but you'd probably know, Brett, working in safety, a lot of the injuries that we're seeing nowadays are, carpal tunnel, tendonitis, golfer's elbow, tennis elbow, and it's all just from these real small hand movements that are repetitive throughout the whole day. Squatting, kneeling, crawling, lying, semi-lying or jumping. So that is a sustained posture that you could potentially be in. You've also got very fast movements, for example, packing tins from fast moving process lines. So these are all just things that you should be able to look at when doing your risk assessment to see, when you're doing your observation of the task, if they are doing any of these postures or movements, which I think would be fair to say that they probably would be in most situations. So then what do we do with that? We write that in our risk assessment. We have identified it. We've potentially assessed what the risk score is there. We've then got to go through the hierarchy of controls. Start at the top. If you can eliminate it, that is the best case scenario. We also know that that's usually not the case. We usually have to go down the hierarchy of controls. We need to substitute, isolate or reduce the risk through engineering controls. Where we can't do that, we would then look at administrative controls, then followed by PPE. We can have a combination of 3, we can have a combination of 2, a combination of all of them mixed together. It doesn't really matter, but the higher up you go, the hierarchy of controls, the more effective your control measure will be as far as reducing that risk score or reducing the exposure to that hazardous manual task for the worker. So you could see how reducing through using a engineering control, such as using a lifting aid, I suppose, or a crane, versus having a rule in place or a procedure in place that you have to bend with your knees. So you can see how the lifting aid is a more effective control measure versus having a policy in place for lifting with your knees. Control measures to consider. So training is a really, really big one. We need to make sure that our workers are trained on how to manually handle safely, how to move their body safely, or how to twist, how to move, how to use their feet. If you've got certain tasks that are repetitive that they're doing, that we've got training in place to make sure they know they need to rotate, they know they need to do their stretches. That's what we're looking at for training. We need to consider the work area design and layout. So can we change it so instead of them having to walk 50 metres to the workbench across the other side of the workshop, can we just move it so the machine's next to the workbench? So can we change our physical layout to reduce their exposure to these hazards? Consider the nature, size, weight or number of persons, animals or things being handled. Can you reduce the weight? Say you're dealing with 20 kilo bags of flour, can you reduce the size of the bags? Then you usually, if you do reduce the size, then you increase the movements made. So it's got to be risk assessed. Tools available. So the tools that you've got, are they working? Are there better ones out there? Are there ones that you can upgrade to make them a little bit more effective in the workplace? And also consider the systems of work. So what systems do you have in place? Maybe you could have part of the role computerized. So instead of them having to walk up the stairs to tell operator B that this is happening, maybe there's a computerized system or a walkie-talkie or something that they can use so they don't have to be exerting themselves for that task. So where we can reduce things, we should be doing it. And that's why when we break it down into a risk assessment, we should be able to break it down into steps as far as where we need to be putting our control measures in place. I like this table from the Code of Practice because it gives you some very real examples. So elimination, these are, the hierarchy of controls. So examples. Elimination, you could automate the manual task, for example, by using robotics. So that's the dream, isn't it? If we can do that, that would be great. We want to deliver goods directly to the point of use to eliminate multiple handling. So maybe you've got to move it from warehouse 1 to warehouse 2, then you've got to move it from warehouse 2 to truck, and then the truck to the the person that you're selling it to. So can we reduce some of those movements and have it just from warehouse to truck versus going from warehouse to warehouse? Let's get rid of those double handling or triple handling situations. I've got some really good examples for substitution. So replace a heavy item with something lighter. For isolation, you could isolate vibrating machinery from the user. Engineering, you could use mechanical lifting aids or trolleys. Level 3, so they're admin related, we could rotate workers between different tasks. We could develop a lifting procedure. Don't think that admin tasks aren't effective. They are incredibly effective if that's all you've got. I've worked with businesses that have had quite high musculoskeletal injuries or high rates as far as the work that they are performing. And all they've, oh, sorry, I just read that there's a poor connection. Can you hear me okay now? That was 10 minutes ago. Really sorry, Heath. Hopefully it's all good now. These businesses, I know one in particular, they reduced their musculoskeletal injuries by 70% just from implementing, not just a rotation. So they couldn't do a repetitive task for more than half an hour. They had to move to a different task. They also implemented that they had to do stretches every hour. They weren't hard. It took them 1 minute to complete all the stretches that they had to do. And they also upskilled more people on more jobs, so they weren't always doing that one job on that machine. And they, reduced their musculoskeletal injuries by 70%. So admin controls have their place, and if it's got that person aspect, so long as the people are actually doing what the admin controls are, they can be incredibly effective. So don't just discount admin controls. And then finally, you've got PPE, so heat resistant gloves, shock absorbent shoes. There's all sorts of different things you can use, especially with vibration tools. You can use things to suspend that vibration a little bit as well. So I like this table. There's way more examples in the codes as well, but I think it's a good visual on thinking outside the square. And if you only got admin controls, there's so many good admin controls that you can do, so long as the people are actually doing them. But it's always better to be higher up on the hierarchy of controls. Hope my connection's okay now. So training, the PCBU must ensure that information, training or instruction provided to a worker is suitable and adequate, having regard to these 3 aspects. So the nature of the work carried out by the worker, the nature of the risks associated with the work at the time of the information, training and instruction, and also the control measures implemented. So I've already said it, but if the team members aren't aware of the control measures, they're not going to be doing them, therefore they're not going to be effective. Same thing if you implement that you have to do stretches every hour. If they're not doing those stretches, then it's not going to be reducing your risk in the workplace. We really need to be making sure that people have received manual handling training. There's so many different types of training that you can do. The TCCI, we run a 1.5 hour manual handling training. It is very general, so it's just on general twisting, moving, bending, lifting. You can get a physio to come to your workplace, and you could pay them to look at specific tasks that you have at work and how they are best to be moving, how they're best to be stretching throughout the day. So you could go that step further rather than having a general training course and actually have a physio come on site and show you how these people should be moving while they're doing this work. And even further to that, you could get some engineers in to actually help you implement better engineering controls. But training is very, very important. We need to set up our employees for success where we can. Oh, there we go. Next steps. So if you're both safety people, you're probably already aware of most of the topics that we've covered on the training, so I am sorry about that. But what we really need to be doing as next steps is to identify our hazardous manual tasks. Now, depending on how big your business is, this can be huge. You could be dealing with hundreds or thousands of manual handling, hazardous manual tasks. So this is where it's always good to upskill a couple whether you have HSRs or safety committee. If you don't have them, upskill your managers, upskill your supervisors, train them on what a hazardous manual task is, and explain to them, the repetitive movements, the forceful movements, and get them to go out and find where these hazardous manual tasks are and come up with a bit of a register for you to walk through. Because as a one safety person, it's nearly impossible to go and do that all yourself. So you really need to recruit and help and train as many people as you can to identify all those hazardous manual tasks. You then need to risk assess all of them. So again, if you can prioritise them in your list, you can work from high to low. So if you've done a quick risk analysis, you know what your high risks, medium risk, low risks are. Start with your high risks, start somewhere, give yourself, every Wednesday afternoon, I'm going to be working through these. And then we need to review. You would also know with your risk assessment, you might put stretches in place. Make sure you're reviewing it after a couple months, or that you're actually going there every week to make sure that they're doing it. Review. If it's not effective, maybe you need to change your stretches. Maybe you need to understand why they're not doing it. Is it because they feel they don't have enough time, or do they not have enough resources to complete these? So reviewing your control measures is so critical, very, very critical. And then this is the second last slide. So we're nearly through it all. We've got other resources. So the two best codes to read through for your hazardous manual tasks is obviously hazardous manual tasks. And then you've got how to manage work health and safety risks. But if you're both doing risk assessments already, you've probably got a fairly good understanding of how to perform a risk assessment. So it's just taking it that step further and breaking it down to each hazardous manual task and how you're going to put control measures in for those. We've also got a hot topic on how to manage work health and safety risks. A really good one that you probably should watch is prevention of musculoskeletal injuries. We had a guest speaker, Scott Willis, who is a physio, come online and take us through 40 minutes of content on how you can prevent musculoskeletal related injuries in your workplace. That's on our YouTube channel. So that's a screenshot of it there. Highly recommend you watch it. He's a very, very knowledgeable man, and he can help you, I suppose, understand what you can do that are a bit easier in the workplace as far as implementing control measures for hazardous manual tasks. TCCI support. We're here to help. So all initial instances of support from us are free. So we can come and do an on-site visit. We can come and do manual handling training for free as well. We can come and assist you with your risk assessments. We can't come and do them for you, but we can come and assist you with them. And we're also only a phone call away. So if you just have questions, or maybe if you wanted to take your team of 50 people through this training session today, we could take them through this session as well, because knowledge is power, and we need to make sure our employees, our supervisors, our managers have a firm understanding of what a hazardous manual task is as well, so that they can effectively identify them and put control measures in place for them as well.